Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of The Only Way is Ethics. We've had a bit of a hiatus for a couple of months, straight off the back of our Women in Health Tech month, which was very successful with 4 panels. So I'll hand straight over to you, Keith, to sort of give us a bit about your background in healthcare and what got you into digital health.
Yeah, cheers, Dean. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Keith Grimes. Doctor because I'm a medical doctor. I was trained and worked as a GP for many years. And now I'm the founder of a health tech innovation consultancy called Curistica. And what we do is we blend clinical, technical, product, and compliance and use that to help people who build, buy, or deploy health tech, particularly AI, do it faster, safer, and smarter. But that's where I am now. So if we go back a bit. I've always loved technology. It's my first love. So I was always into my computer games and all that sort of stuff all the way back, but medicine too. And went to medical school in the 90s and up in Aberdeen. I'm from Scotland originally. And during that time, studied the medicine, didn't have a particular specialism I liked, but was always trying to get tech into it. And that's basically been the story of my career, and in the 90s, there was things like the internet and mobile phones arrived, but people didn't sort of think so much about it. But I was very, very keen all the time to bring it in. No one could say exactly how you blended the two. And I was interested in general medicine, either emergency medicine or general practice. Emergency medicine was great, but it's pretty hardcore in terms of living. But a GP that I worked with when I was in A&E suggested, well, you try general practice. And I did, and I really liked it. So from 2000 up to 2024, I was a general practitioner. And I worked all over the place in Scotland originally, then came down to England in 2004. But my real interest was urgent care. So I worked like in-hours urgent care, out-of-hours urgent care, but always saying like, how can I do some tech with this? Which meant that I often did things, actually, that's kind of how I got into governance and compliance, because they said, well, you need computers to do this stuff. So if you come in and do clinical governance and that, then I'm sure there'll be some computers in there. And I was like, yeah, no problem. And did that. So very early on, I got into that side of things as well as the clinical side. And tried to formalize a way into it. Got involved in some NHS projects in Scotland, the ECI program, which was like a precursor to what the summary care record for Scotland is. And then when I came down to England, I lived on the southeast coast, worked in the out-of-hours sector, did a lot of clinical governance and quality improvement, lots of innovative projects in emergency departments, but also did a lot with technology and got involved in the summary care record and IC24. I worked on their in-house EHR called Clio. And that's when I kind of got into the clinical safety side of things. It was, pre-DCB, but I got involved at all that time. And with the DCB side of things, or the clinical safety side of things, I was involved in the integration with the spine and everything like that. But I was always trying to do more, got involved in like remote care back in the early 2010s, but really started to get irritated that things weren't moving faster. And I'm a gamer, I got into VR. I've been involved in VR for a while, started using it with my patients. And it was really effective to help reduce their pain when they were having painful procedures. And so I talked a lot about it online. And so I started to get a bit of a name online about like being innovative with that. And I was involved in innovation within healthcare and the NHS, but the clinical work I was enjoying less, the tech I was enjoying more, and something gave, and it was me. I burnt out in 2017. I was trying to do too much. I was pretty unwell. But when I recovered, and still remain well, that was like, I can't do this nonsense anymore. I can't like split these two. At which point, Babylon, very big, sort of big at the time, super big afterwards, and now no more, got in touch and said, we've got all these doctors helping building these AI technologies, but some of them could be junior and actually it'd be good to help organize them. So I came on board as their director of digital health innovation. And that was when I got there. I thought, now this is more like it. It was a very innovative, very disruptive company using really advanced technology that you look back now and say, that's easy. It wasn't easy then. Lots of people didn't like it. But I got to work with the doctors and try and find that blend between the medicine and the world of product and commercial. And I have to say, that's the sweet spot. That's the blend of what I do. And I loved it. And that's when I really got my experience in working in artificial intelligence. Worked on a lot of things like symptom checkers, risk prediction tools. And even in 2021, there was an ambient scribe. I know we'll talk about them now, but Babylon had one of them. Didn't take it to
Yeah.
market. It worked. There's a story in that probably won't go into today, but it worked. It did do it. It's a large language model.
Yeah.
But as Babylon expanded to the US and started to have issues with regards to their growth and everything, they weren't building so much product, and I left and set up on my own as an independent consultant, doing what I did at Babylon, but just with other companies. And then I'd always thought that blend, if you understand healthcare and compliance, really important stuff, but you also understand like the building, the fixing of the problems, you can work well there as part of a team. Then the right stuff gets built at the right speed, and it's safe and it works. I'm like, that's it. And actually, I describe myself as a digital health doctor because I practice medicine through the products that I build, not the patients that I see. It's not recognized as a specialism, about time it was. And that's what I do now. And with Curistica, I thought, well, I like doing this. Lots of work that I need to do. Can't do it all myself. So I started to assemble a team to do it at scale. And that's what we do now. And it's exciting stuff, particularly now the rest of the world seems to have caught up on what AI can do. So that's the work that I do now, trying to blend those things together because it is possible to build exciting, innovative stuff fast and safe. This is the bit that you and I speak about a lot. It's like, there's no reason that it can't be done right. Like, it can be done. And I'm always surprised that people don't realize this. We can maybe discuss that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Keith, for that. And it's really interesting to get your sort of like background from that sort of like those days as sort of, you say like sort of emergency care. I think also as a sort of like as a clinician, it's I think it's quite attractive, isn't it, when you sort of like, ED and sort of all that stuff. But it is real sort of like, it's that fast pace, isn't it? It's really hard hitting. It's really sort of like, quite stressful. Sort of, I know personally from my experiences, I just went down a level into sort of like orthopedics and trauma, and I thought that would do for me. sort of,
I'll do these emergencies. At least there'll be a moment when everyone shuts up and I can just start drilling and sawing. And apologies to the listeners, but that's a bit reductive. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that nursing perspective, and sort of like seeing people fixed and out the door is quite satisfying. In that sort of respect. But then going into that sort of like the world of GPs and sort of and I'm sure we'll get on to some of that around governance. I'd like to speak a bit about governance as we go through, and primary and social care as well. So as part of your role now, obviously you mentioned on a number of occasions the right stuff, the right build, fast and safe in relation to what we're doing, and sort of like you've mentioned safety on a few occasions, and as we know, we're both heavily sort of involved in the work around sort of the NHS safety standards, other regulation that involves medical device regulation and all the ISOs that sit around it. And it's no mean feat, is it, for innovators, for manufacturers coming into the NHS. It's a hard market for them to get into. Lots of people will argue and say, well, there's too many hoops and there's lots of red tape to jump through. And I think especially now we're seeing, and I'm not going to sit here and us sort of like go into the depths of sort of like 129, 160 and these sort of stuff, but it would be really interesting for us to have a chat around the podcast has a bit of a hiatus for a couple of months, and I think in those couple of months there's been some stuff that's happened in relation to we know we've got NHS England, the abolishment of that, and then the new ensuing plans that are coming into place and the increase in pressures. I think what is it now? What's the price we're putting on the head of a person? £18.30 something, I think it is, that they've got.
Such a small number.
Sort of price wise, that's how much we've got to spend per head. I think in this in the new the reformation of the ICBs, and I'd like to sort of like to start there in relation to, and really it'd be interesting to get your perspective as as a GP in relation to what do you think that means for primary care? Because I always look at it because I'm a nurse, I've always worked in secondary care, and there always seems to be this concentration from the trust perspective. And I don't know why, but I always focused on it in relation to what trusts are part of these, rather than looking at primary social care, etc., and stuff like that. And then really having a spin on it in relation to, we both work in digital health, and you already alluded to that, sort of like, you've always been interested in technology, and coming at it from that point of view of sort of, technology's there as an enabler, isn't it? So that we can sort of, deliver sort of, effective care. Where do you think we're at, Keith, at the moment? And what I think it would be interesting to get, what would you like to see happen? Because, just for the audience out there as well that don't know, and I think most of them will, is that, we're going, I think the plan is we're going down from, aren't we, 42 ICBs down to sort of, I think it's 26, isn't it? Something like that. I may have got those figures wrong, apologies.
There's definitely a reduction, like they're going to be over a broader area, aren't they? Yeah,
it's a reduction. And I think what's happened with that, when I first heard, it got me worried straight away. Because we've seen this happen before with the old strategic health authorities, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And one of the benefits of having been in the game for a while, as we see it come and go, tigers in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. We go full circle, don't we? And this always happens within sort of like governments, etc. But what it's done, it's created a stir, hasn't it? And it has created a stir within the digital health space. But I think at the moment we're a bit unclear, aren't we, around how it's going to affect us. So it'd be good for us to chat around that, and maybe just a bit around 10-year plan.
Yeah, well, I suppose where we are right now, it's sort of midpoint of May 2025. Things are still pretty uncertain. I think that's the first thing to say, is that we're in a period of uncertainty when it comes to the NHS and how healthcare is delivered, and how it's led, how it's managed, how it's delivered is all kind of slightly up in the air. And so people are going to feel a bit anxious about that, regardless of how you felt about how it was before. Any kind of change comes with some sort of anxieties. They come with some excitement, of course, because there's an opportunity to craft things in a better way. But then you've got the fact that you just mentioned that number. There's not much money to go around as well. So we're going to have to try and do something and improve it and make it better, but not lose out on what we're already doing. So yeah, it is a tricky problem. And so I'm not surprised it's taking them some time to kind of come to a decision on that. Everyone always wants something more clarity sooner. But it's going to take whatever time it is. Let's hope that we get some certainty. That's the first thing, is that whatever decisions are made, it would be nice if there was some clarity about it. Of course, some people are going to like it and some people are not going to like it. You can't win 100%. No. But you can't hedge it. You can't hedge it and just make it kind of super vague, because if you make it super vague, everyone who's involved, from the patients, the people delivering the care, the people commissioning the care, the front end, the back end, leading it, and then anyone who's building technology to sell in it or service it as well, that uncertainty just means there's a kind of pause. So that's kind of where we are. But people are desperately trying to think, well, but it'd be nice to be on the front foot when this all resolves. So the question is, what comes next? So the first thing is, well, let's look at what the government is saying. There's the triple aim, which is from illness to prevention, or sickness to prevention. I'm primary care here. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Of course.
Yeah.
Hospital to community, primary care. Like, yeah, absolutely. We've been shouting about this for ages. Okay, that's great. Like getting care close to people in the community also means we can get the prevention side done. You're not going to be surprised when I say analog to digital. I'm just like, well, that's been my life. That's great. Let's get this done. So like those triple aims. And so we then see the NHS England was the kind of the first thing that took a hit. Get rid of NHS England. We're going to do something. Now NHS England did obviously important things. So those important things they did aren't going away. They have to go somewhere. So the question is, where do they go? Do they go to the Department of Health and Social Care? Maybe some of them will. Do they go to some other new body at a high level, or somewhere slightly lower down that chain? Probably. Do they send them to the ICBs? Well, the ICBs have already said they've already been whittled down to 50% of what they were, so they're not going to have that capacity. And their focus is on about that kind of service commissioning, isn't it? It's not the delivery, it's the commissioning side. So what's left? It's the kind of providers, hospitals, primary care, secondary care, community providers, and so on. That's the bit that we need to watch and see what happens next. Now, you can be positive about this and say, well, this is great. Like everyone in primary care saying, give us more power, give us more ability to work out what services we need to provide because we know these people best and we can do this sort of thing. Of course, unsurprisingly, now that looks like it's going to happen. I was like, I don't know if we want all that, where's the money to come with it? This is the story that's going to be told. But we are going to see more decision-making and power, hopefully moving it sort of further down the chain, closer to the front line, which is good in terms of meeting the actual needs of the people at the front line, the patients, their families, those people delivering care, whether they're clinical or not. That's good. But my worry is that, people complain about management and everything in the NHS. The NHS is actually very undermanaged in terms of percentages anyway. They get a very hard rap, and there's a very specific set of skills, knowledge, and expertise to do it right. I don't think these things just arise out of nowhere. And they're maybe not as well known at the front line. So that's my anxiety, is that they're going to say, yeah, you go ahead and manage it now. But they're busy delivering care and so on. So that's the anxiety for me. And of course, if we talk about compliance, which was already kind of sketchily done and variably done, is now going to be sort of spread even more widely. And what I've said about management and leadership, it's the same for compliance, isn't it? Each practice understanding everything needs about compliance. Each practice needs to understand data protection, cybersecurity, and we're getting more and more tech. So yeah, we got a lot to unpick, but we have the opportunity to think carefully and how can we do it better? That's the bit I get excited about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We've got the opportunity now, haven't we, to do this right? And as you said, like sort of, ICBs as the commissioners, but then obviously we've got the frontline sort of, I have a worry as well, like yourself, in relation to, like you say, especially within primary and social care, because I think we know within the sector that it's been poorly managed in relation to regulation, digital health, etc. They've always been like the distant cousin, haven't they? That just forgotten about. And I think we've got the opportunity now to put some really good models in place in relation and recommendations, especially seeing that we're revising DCB 0129 and DCB 160. That whole governance piece is done properly, and that there are some well-structured models that are communicated and articulated properly. Because as we know at the moment, you look at the standards, what's it say about governance? It's very weak. It's very weak.
It's pretty non-specific. I mean, it could be, isn't it? Applied, but it's not clear.
It's very high level, isn't it? Top management this, top management that, top management. That's all it mentions, isn't it? It doesn't really give you any clear direction, where I think it should be role specific in relation to, and there should be, a lot more musts and shoulds in relation to, and direction. And I think implementation guidance in relation to that, rather than necessarily too much mandate from the actual standards themselves. But again, there's some really quick for me, I think there's some quick wins in relation to, you can't expect each practice to understand and sort of like, if you're going to try and get
do all of it, no, it's too much.
Hazard log, safety case reports, etc., and all that stuff, that should be done at the sort of higher level, cascaded down. You have like sort of implementation checklists, etc. We work in that sort of respect and support clients like that as well. But again, it's all well and good us as consultants sort of like doing that and having best practice. But I think this is where we could, and bring it into the conversation, it's all of us working together. Because I still think there is, I'm trying to change like that sort of the conversation, and I hope we can with the revision of the standards. I don't think independents play well with the NHS. And industry at the moment. I think we need to improve that relationship, especially at the moment. There's there's lots of things, isn't there? There's lots of opportunities. I'm quite excited by it in one respect, but also quite apprehensive as well.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying about that kind of tension between, the manufacturers, the vendors, the 0120, like if we're talking safety, the 0121 side and the 0160 side. And, the more I do it the way that we're operating now, it should really kind of blend, really. At the moment, it's like, here's your 0129, see you later kind of thing. And then it's, and then it kind of then you have to start rolling it out that way. And so I think if you sort of, and I'm closer right now, even though we work on both sides, closer to the kind of the builder's side, the manufacturer's side.
Yeah.
And the first thing is that they want, they'll do what they have. They do want to build something that's safe and effective, but they'll also focus their energies on those things that people are asking them to do, or that they know that there's definitely out there. And here we might come back to it, is that kind of gap in safety, at least, where it's like legally required in England. It's legally required, but there's no one enforcing it. There's no name, there's no one chasing after you on that one, is there? But with data protection, there is someone chasing after you. ICO will do this. They have their own issues, but ICO, service provision, CQC, cybersecurity
as well.
Got that side of things, and of course medical device regulation, and you get the MHRA. But each of these bodies is under tremendous pressure. They're under resourced. They're having to deal with all kinds of changes and nonsense as well. So I feel for them too. And what that means is that no one's got the headspace to think about, like, what are we doing that's duplicated? How can we actually help people? And I think the sort of, maybe the naive thought is like, well, if I'm working on the manufacturer side, there's potentially not much extra work that we could do to do it right, first of all, but also do it in a way that makes it easier on that next step, clearer. This comes down to sort of a definition of what is a good safety case. We've talked about this before. So it's not entirely clear, is it? It's certainly not a tick box. But what is it? How can we make that easier? Because that then facilitates what you've just said, which is what can be done at a high level across many places. And there'll always be like a little bit that needs to be done in a very specific place. If that can be done lightweight, then maybe we can sort this out. This is why the opportunity is there, but it does require everyone to sort of go, look, we're all trying to work together here. So let's come together and see if we can craft a better way.
But what? Yeah. See, I always say, and I've said this to some of the guys at the NHS, and I get the whole 129, 160 piece, Keith, and sort of like it is difficult sometimes, and there is still that gap and relationships there, but also it's a relationship between NHS England at the moment and that digital clinical safety team, and a bit resistant and a bit reluctant to bring in independence, because as we know, Keith, the largest amount of experience within clinical risk management is in the independent sector. It's not in the NHS. And we're doing this day in, day out. So why can't we all get around the table? And why can't we, and this leads on to my sort of, look, 129, 160 being revised. We were part of the same group for the 129.
Yeah, same workshop. They were doing the round tables, and they invited people in to speak.
Yeah, and we were on the same one of those. And I think coming away from those, I've spoke to yourself, I've spoke to other people on that, and still people aren't convinced. And now it's like, we're going out for public it'll go out to public consultation, and they'll have working groups. And I think my questions are, well, what do those? We did these 3 months ago, Keith. It's February that we did those.
Right.
We're 3 months down the line. I've not heard anything else at the moment. And I'm not saying they're not doing anything, but we haven't heard anything. When are the working groups happening? Are we going to be involved in the working group? Is that just the NHS? Is it NHSE that are the working group? Nobody's letting us know. And see, look, we're clinicians, we're practical in our approaches. And I'd rather say, right, well, we've done all that, collate all the information, get it all together in a nice structured manner, get us all around the table now, face to face. I hate all this Teams sort of like stuff.
Yeah, I think we do need to have people where possible, literally in the same room.
Absolutely. And you're right, where possible, because we know it's not so like, everyone can't get round there. But let's get round the table, let's thrash this out, and let's get an actual plan. and let's involve everybody. Yes, there's going to be difference of opinion, isn't there? And there's going to be sort of like, because we know that just happens all the time. But why can't we just get around the table? Because at the moment, I'm sort of like, I posed the question now, what does it mean at the moment? And especially with, these consultations came first, and then all of a sudden, like, the abolition of NHSE, and it's like, right, okay, so what does that now mean for this ongoing initiative? How's it going to be? Because I'm just looking now, and I'm like, sort of, is that going to be scuppered? Is it going to make this process a lot like that? Is it just going to be drawn out? Are we going to lose focus? Are we going to lose momentum? And then are we just going to get to the point where they say, well, actually, we're just going to crack on as we are?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And there's maybe a whole bunch of reasons as to why it's going on. That and the increased uncertainty throws it all a little bit in the air. But at the same time, I think there are those of us working within the NHS and within the independents and everyone who have experience in this area, who are motivated for the right reason. I don't do this just because it's business. I do this because I really care. And I do care. I'm a doctor. I care that the things that I do for my patients are safe. And
totally.
When it comes down to it, clinical safety, it seems like the most obvious thing in the world is like, you've built something that does something. Yeah. Have you looked at whether it's safe? Right. And the right answer to that is that, well, it isn't technically a medical device. So no, like, even if it's just like an appointment booking, does it do something useful? Yes. Okay. What if it stops working and it stops doing that useful thing? Is that unsafe? And then people say, well, it's just booking an appointment. Right. But if a person really needs an appointment and then they don't get it, can something happen to that person? Well, yes. Well, there you go. Right. And then, or the other thing is you say, what if this was your wife or your kid or your mum or your dad? Oh, no, that's different. It's not different. It's really obvious. It's like, and what you can't say is, I didn't know that I had to say that it was safe. That doesn't stand up, particularly when there's law out there on this. It doesn't have to be hard. You just start by saying it does something. The more it does, the more you have to kind of prove and show and everything. But yeah, does it do something useful? Yes. All right. Is it safe? That's all I'm saying. Have you checked? Have you thought about it? Show me that you've thought about it. That's what it is. No, I didn't, because no one asked me to do it. Imagine I was giving a person a drug. I found this outside. It looks nice. I'm giving it to them. Yeah, have you tested it? No, it's probably fine. We wouldn't accept that. We wouldn't accept that if someone said, we have it in food. We have it everywhere. Why is it in somewhere that we all agree is important, healthcare or technology? Oh no, here it's okay because it's more important that we move really fast and just test things out. This is healthcare. You know that it's a safe bit, but this is a bit that is different to what everything else. No, but let's remember that, and then now between us all, we can start working on, well, what's the best way to do this that allows everything to move in the right direction.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before on previous podcast episodes, but I had a sort of episode in the early days with Clive Flashman, and when he was sort of talking about so from that patient safety learning perspective, and I think also we need to align the. See, I'm a big believer in trying to get rid of this clinical safety and it's digital patient safety in relation to that. I don't know people people in different camps, and we've always called it clinical safety. And it's but then it doesn't help that alignment with patient safety because people think of it as a different entity.
There's clinical and there's patient side. I know,
and there's and the patient side of it, and people see it as something completely different. But interesting when Clive was talking about figures. And they did sort of like an approximation because we also know that the reporting of potential digital clinical incidents nationally is quite bad.
Yes.
And trying to get to that. But when he was doing sort of an estimation on figures, it amounted to an equivalent, and this is how he described it, as one aeroplane falling out of the sky of people that were harmed or potentially killed a day. Now, from what you've just said around people's realization of like sort of like, oh, does this need to be safe, or does it, etc., and asking those questions. Well, if you turned on the news and an aeroplane was falling out of the sky every day, would you get on an aeroplane? You probably wouldn't. But also, we know for fact, due to regulation, that as soon as 1, 2, 3 aeroplanes fell out the sky, all aeroplanes would be grounded. Do you know what I mean? It would come to that something would happen and it would stop. It would come to all planes would be grounded. There'd be investigations. There'd be process that kicked in. There would be root cause analysis. You know, there'd be all of this sort of like regulation, governance, etc., that would kick in. Why doesn't it within the NHS or what? I mean, why aren't we? You know,
but even in the past few years. Yeah, everyone who's listening to this, even in the past few years, will have got with the airline thing. You know, remember what was happening with Boeing, and then there was a problem with some of the airlines that tragically led to actual fatalities. And then there was a realization that what was happened there potentially affected a whole range of them potentially. And I was traveling at the time, and I remember everything went into chaos because for a period of time, that model of aircraft couldn't fly. Just no, absolutely not. Just, you know, it was all stopped. General chaos. And then it got resolved. But everyone was like a bit upset about that, but they understood that was the case.
Yeah.
Again, people listening, is like, there's two things. It's like, if you're working in a healthcare setting, when was the last time that you personally submitted some kind of report or incident where technology went wrong? Like the last time. And think in your mind about like what happened then. It was probably something pretty significant. It probably took a lot for you to do that. You know, it was a big thing. Okay. All right. So now say in your working day, how many times does the technology you're using go wrong in some way, even tiny way? Like, and I'll give you an example. You're working general practice, the EHR crashes or is slow to log in, right? Just that, or your pass card doesn't work. How many times has that happened, right? Okay, how many times has that happened? How many times have you reported something? Why is there such a big gap? What is there about technology that means, yeah, it just goes wrong, you know, it only has to go wrong very badly before we say something? There's something adrift there. It fascinates me. It's like, how do we deal with that? Like, because if we reported everything that ever went wrong with the technology that we had, I mean, of course, we'd have a flood of stuff, but it would start with a flood, but then that flood would reduce because things would get better.
It would. And one of the things, so I train CSOs, and sort of on that sort of like, you know, you were saying, Keith, you know, at the moment you're more on that manufacturer side. I'm more sort of on the health organisation side, because we're doing, you know, we support health organisations with the whole governance piece and stuff like that as well. And interestingly, something that I've recommended is screensavers. Yeah. All clinicians and all staff within hospitals, within health organisations, are exposed to screensavers on their computers, etc. I would like to see a national initiative for a clinical risk management, or whatever we want to call it, clinical safety screensaver. Just gives a little explanation of, did you know this could happen if system said goes wrong and it could have an impact on the patient? If you are worried about said sort of systems, etc., call this number or email this, you know, something like that. And it should be a mainstay. It should never be there. And someone said to me, interestingly, in one of the courses, but people get like annoyed with it. Good. Because if they're annoyed with it, it means they're thinking about it. Yeah. If they're not annoyed about it, and they're just going to ignore it. Yeah. But have it there as a mainstay, then it may, I don't know, get people thinking, said to, you know, I saw that screensaver about sort of like, you know, and doing that.
Or maybe, you know, other ways. I mean, of course, you've now got me thinking about, like, is there a safety case for a screensaver? What if the screensaver didn't disable and I couldn't see the record? Well, I'm not going to go into that, but, because that's a horror. But we'll pause that. Maybe a way into it, at least, is to get people to at least start digging a little bit to understanding the role that technology took part, or the role that technology played in any incident. Like, even if it's like, you think of, given how embedded technology is, it's very unlikely that technology wasn't in some way involved, maybe not a causative mechanism, but was involved in something that went wrong. And
Yeah.
so as you look through this, maybe spending a bit more time thinking about, well, like what happened here? Did it contribute to anything here? What would we do in that area? I think people maybe feel quite separate from being able to change it because it is a manufacturer or someone else has procured the system or something like that. But if you're talking about general practice, there will be technologies that they've brought in. And I suppose if you're a GP in a practice, and whilst we help on the manufacturers, we also work on the provider side too. If you spent money out of your practice budget and you got some new technology to help with the service that you delivered, and something went wrong with that, you'd probably be much more likely to go back to manufacturer and say, hey, what the hell's happened here? Like this didn't work because the money's coming out of their pocket and so on. So I think it's within people, but yeah, there's something odd going on that we just don't see because it happens so often. Maybe it's because it happens so often we just stop seeing it. Every little headache, hiccup, email in the wrong place, accidentally CCing people instead of BCCing people, whatever it is, you just think, that's the price we pay for this, or we can't change it. Maybe if we could start finding bits that, making it worth it and making it easy to report it in a way that didn't become just an incredible headache for everyone. That's the other thing. I know Hugh Harvey, when he talks on the regulatory side, about manufacturers putting a very easy function to submit the kind of yellow card type reports and everything. It's that kind of thing. We just need to we can't be scared about what will happen if we start mentioning it because it happens so often. We have to start, but there's a way in, and then we can start to manage it and change.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It has to be easy. We can't make it sort of like convoluted as we do sometimes, and maybe, like you say, introducing into that sort of that we're as clinicians and as sort of like team member staff within the NHS, they're quite used to raising incidents, IR1s and sort of whatever we call them. But it's almost, isn't it, trying to add that question in around technology, but making it a mandate that you have to ask that question within that process to say, was there technology involved? What technology was it within the clinical workflow, non-clinical workflow, and stuff like that? Not in a sort of like now fill out these 100 other sort of like forms, etc. Because people are just going to go, I'm not doing that.
There's a really I'll give you an example that I guarantee everyone, regardless whether you're a patient or on the provider side, is dealing with all the time. I guarantee you it. And it's e-triage systems. Like instead of phoning up the problems before, and people now put their symptoms in and that's triage. And I understand why it's done and done effectively. It could be great. But having had some personal experience recently in helping family members navigate it, I'm seeing it from the other side now. And so I see how complex it is, unusable, and it can futz halfway through and you have to restart and everything. Okay, so each of those is an instant, right? So as a patient or a person that cares for someone, I guarantee you'll have experienced that, right? And I also guarantee you that if you're on the provider side, you'll have received a complaint from someone complaining about that, right? Please send me a message on LinkedIn if you've never had this. I'd be stunned, right?
Yeah.
My question to you is, what did you do about it?
Yeah.
What did you do about it? People are already saying, here is an incident. I needed care. The technology got in the way or failed or anything. I could not get the care that I received. They let you know because they're harmed in some way, even if it's a minor irritation. But I guarantee there'll be other ones as well. What did you do when you saw that? There you go. This is what the work is all about, because if we know how to fix these things. We've got the processes. Dean, we describe it all the time. We're just not doing it.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it needs to be. I think frontline. I think this is where one of the big issues is frontline staff and raising the awareness around sort of like that digital health incidents and problems. And like you said, trying to let people know. Don't be scared to sort of like to raise it and thinking that people are going to get inundated, because these things will sort of like they will calm down. They will sort of like shallow out. And I think it would be a lot better in relation to that. So, Keith, we've spoken around that the sort of like regulations and governance and sort of like how we could do all of that. And I'd like us to sort of talk a little bit around sort of, you talked about enforcement earlier, and it's sort of coming back slightly, isn't it? We have these standards, and we spoke around, you've got ICO, we've got MHRA, we've got the National Cyber Centre, which all of these bodies can enforce and fine quite hefty fines to organisations for not being compliant. But yet, we look at DCB 0129 and 160, they're mandated. And I know I've spoken about this before on the podcast, but I think we are front and centre now. This is the time where the decision making needs to be, we're revising the standards. There's lots of argument of people saying, well, we don't need another notified body for something like this. However, I will say then, okay, well, if we don't have a notified body, or there's not an organisation that's prepared to take responsibility for that, how are we going to do it? Because I think even as a minimum, there needs to be an annual external audit requirement for organisations, both health organisations and manufacturers, to show evidence that they have been audited against their clinical risk management system and their processes within, as a minimum in relation to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose in short, you sort of think, well, yes, of course, but then at the same time, I'm particularly keen on innovation and change, and having seen when this is done badly, how it can not solve the problem and kind of make things worse. So we've got to think carefully about this, and it is a tricky one, so we've got MHRA for medical devices, got ICO for data protection, we've got the National Cybersecurity for cybersecurity. There's a few of them in there, but clinical safety, let's say, doesn't have anyone particularly enforcing it. It's not specified, there's no one doing this. So what do you do? Is the MHRA going to pick this up? Well, no, their hands are full with medical devices, and actually, of course, medical devices have their own aspects of this too, but still need to do the safety work. So they're not going to pick up everything else. And of course, there's lots of other technologies that aren't medical devices. ICO, again, hands full, data protection. I mean, I often think there's a great deal of cross, within a good safety case, you'll be considering data protection and the harms there as well. But they're not going to pick this up. National Cyber, maybe not. So who's left? One maybe way into this is CQC. Now, the CQC at least have responsibility as a sort of body to look at the safety and quality of the care as provided, that service. Yeah. So all right, that's that side. So if you're using technology to deliver a service, I think it's a very good fit for the CQC. Now, they're going to need the knowledge and everything, but it's reasonable for them to say, all right, what is it you do and who you're doing it for and everything. And there are bits of it that are done by humans. Like, show me how they work and that they're all safe. Yeah. There'll be bits of it that are done by technology. What technology? How are you making sure that it's safe and quality effective? And then you're immediately into all those other things like DCP and so on. So maybe that side, there's a way in. However, what about the manufacturer side? That's the kind of gap. I don't know. And I've been part of the work. We'll make it onto AI. Myself and Haris Shuaib were commissioned by the Department of Business and Trade and the Healthcare UK section to write a report on generative AI in healthcare as a driver for growth. So maybe come back to that. But the reason I mention it now is that within that, we have a government that's very keen on growth, very keen on innovation, all these sort of things. We've got the RIO, the idea that regulatory bodies need to get kind of leaner and more concise and non-duplicate and so on. So there's that kind of pressure to reduce that. So I don't think we would get a warm reception to say, let's spin up another body. But at least with what I've said about the CQC is you're not going to get the deployment side without the manufacturer side feeding into it. So whilst the CQC aren't enforcing that, you can't deliver, it can't make a difference in the world without that first bit being done. So I know I haven't properly answered your question, but I think that's the kind of first step. I don't know, maybe people listening know what the answer is. I really don't. But that's maybe a way in to sort of raise the bar, at least, you know, from a manufacturer's point of view. If every single person they sell to is saying, I need this, then at the very least it'll be done. The question, of course, is it done to the right level, and etc.
Yeah, absolutely, and it poses so many more questions. And you're right. I don't think at the moment that, you know, anyone's really addressing it in that respect. Because if you speak to NHS England, or I think I mentioned it on our workshop for 129, and I think one of the guys there from NHS said, "Oh, we don't need another regulatory body, etc." and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I know that, but how do we do it? I think CQC's a really good way in, potentially, that you could get, you know, trained individuals, and you could work those people up, you know, in a structured manner. But like any audit process, Keith, as we know, you know, it'd have structure, it'd have sort of like be supported. And I think that'd be really good for the DCB 160 side. But what it would also highlight is that, like you said, that if they ask the question, do you have a 129? If that health organisation says no, then they can say, well, how have you, you know, they can sort of question in that respect. But I think the whole 129 piece, and the whole regulation of that, at the moment, it's a bit of a wild west, really, to be honest.
Yeah, and it is a shame, because you'll know this, I certainly know this, is that a 129 is not like just a wall that you have to climb over. It's a mechanism by which you build something great, like something really great and really effective and really safe, and it helps actually, from a product perspective, fit to the market you're selling to, because you're selling to a market where safety matters. So why wouldn't you consider that to get it in there? Because at some point, if you don't, it's not going to fit the essential requirements of the market you're going to. So there's work to be done to make sure that it's a really fluid and constructive service. You know, we work really hard on trying to do that as ourselves, you know, and I know other people do, because there's a kind of history of, like, you know, manufacturers don't like going to it because they go to, you know, they go to clinical safety people, and they say, well, you can't do that. And so they don't speak to them because they'll be told they can't do it. So they don't go speak to them until they absolutely have to. And then they go to the safety people, and the poor safety people go, what on earth are you, like, this, you're going to have to go back and start again. And then the manufacturing side, you know, the product team are like, oh, I knew this was going to happen. But it only happened because you didn't have that nice conversation at the start. You know, you just drifted too far apart. Yeah. So we work hard to try and bring that further down the line. So there's, I think, some reputations to be repaired. But when it works well, it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that leads us nicely into sort of like, you know, we've got these regulations for a reason. I think I'm with you on manufacturers should celebrate their compliance with 129, because what it demonstrates is sound, robust process if done properly, and it allows that organisation to demonstrate that they have not just good clinical risk management process, but good organisational process as part of that structure. Then comes along artificial intelligence. And
yeah,
you
of
know,
course.
we add that into the mix in relation to regulatory compliance. So, you know, someone would, you know, you could say sort of like, oh, you know, there's always someone that has to put a spanner in the works, sort of like, you know, to muddy the water. Because I think at the moment, from an AI perspective, we're as a sector, we are forging forward at speed in relation to AI technologies. I see it firsthand when I go into to do training and do support, where there is a concern that we are forging ahead, but people are not going for the low-hanging fruit in relation to, look, you know, we've got an evolving NHS, we've got, you know, that we're trying to look at efficiencies and savings. Therefore, AI has a role to play in relation to, we both know as clinicians, Keith, there's lots of clinical administrative functions out there that it could really, really just absolutely, and there is lots of work happening in relation to that, to sort of like, you know, to make those. but we should be concentrating in those areas,
Mm.
not necessarily, but we seem to be just sort of like forging ahead with all the sort of like, clinical decision support, risk stratification, all of this sort of stuff, more so than sort of like on the others.
Yeah, you're right. I think, well, the first thing to say is that, we'll come on to AI, but actually automation, like, don't even think about AI, the AI you may be thinking about, where just getting automation, simple automations in place will be a fantastic start. And we've got lots of experience there. The nice thing about automation without the added uncertainty that AI will adds to the mix would be great. And of course, it's much more predictable, which means it's much easier for you to sort of conceive about what the failure modes might be and how to control from them. So, why make your life hard? Like, say, well, we can at least show that this is safe and it's repeatable, and it can do it fast and at scale. And by the way, it's way cheaper than using AI as well. Okay, there you go. So let's get the automations in place. But AI does a bunch of cool things too, and useful things. Then you're thinking about, well, what are those tasks? Like the way I like to look at it is like, why don't we use automation or AI for the things where we're asking a human to work like a machine? Like, that's the obvious thing to me, is like, and those are generally the things that people don't like anyway. They'd be happy to have it taken off their plate. So, AI can obviously do a lot of really complex and exciting things too, but I think that's why things like ambient scribes have been really picked up. There's a couple of reasons, but part of it, that the bit where people feel, and when clinicians write their notes, doctors, nurses, or whatever, they're not just recording what's going on. Like, that's the big mistake for people to think. They're doing a lot more than that. But even recording what's going on is part of the work. And if you can square that off, you're less distracted and kept with that, so you get more headspace back to listen to your patient and everything else. So a lot of benefits in there. I think that's where AI, like more advanced AIs like ambient scribes, can be useful. Using it to like summarize information, definitely helpful, particularly when there's a lot of information. But as we all know, even though AI is getting better, there's still the scope for things to go wrong. And the thing that causes me to sweat, and I'm sure it's the same when someone says we've got an AI in here, is like, what's that kind of new, slightly unpredictable thing? How on earth do I quantify this? How do we control this? And it can be done, but it starts with kind of reining things in and loosening it up. So yeah, let's use technology to solve the things, particularly those things where people are having to work like machines anyway. Free up that time, allow them to really lean into the things that they're good at, which is being a human. And then we get a bit more headspace back, a bit more time's passed, a bit more experience with these other technologies, start bringing them in. But you're right, we're human beings. We love shiny, exciting, interesting things. Well, that's my entire life, is shiny, interesting things that I chase after. But yeah, like, if we can solve some of the lower stuff, we could be off to a start.
Yeah, no, and it's, for me, it's frustrating at the moment, because sort of, there's some really good technologies out there as well, and I think looking at it from an innovator's perspective, there's lots of people that are sort of like, that are forging ahead. However, I think there's a big knowledge gap within the NHS around AI, and I think that needs to be sort of, that gap needs to be shortened greatly in relation to sort of like, and especially in, look, I spoke about AI in clinical risk management last year at Het North, and even the simplest of concepts of sort of like supervised, unsupervised learning, and sort of like, regression, classification and stuff like that, the audience aren't aware of those terms.
No.
A percentage. And then, so I was saying, if you're not aware of those terms, how are you going to risk assess against those technologies if you don't understand what the technology is doing? And this brings us back to all that, doesn't it? Explainability, transparency, as we all know, accountability, fairness, etc.
Yeah.
But it's just applying it in a different way, isn't it? And do you think it's bringing that back to the clinical safety officer, Keith? How should a clinical, so from your perspective, how should a clinical safety officer be preparing themselves
Yeah,
for
that's a good
assessing
question.
AI systems, and how would you sort of approach that?
Yeah, so I'll maybe talk. So in the report that I was mentioning earlier, and I make a lot of recommendations about this, but we'll start with the basics. Is that everyone needs to know more about AI. So we need everyone. I mean, from school upwards. And the bit that makes me sad is that a medical student going into medical school this year are going into a curriculum that's going to see them graduate in 5 years' time, practice. There is no mandatory component on digital health, data science, or AI. None. So unless there's lots of mandatory courses. So 5 years from now, if a person hasn't chosen to go and learn elsewhere, those doctors 5 years from now, think where we are now, 5 years from now, may not have had any teaching on this. Same with nurses, same with any other sort of specialist or like clinical or non-clinical staff in there. I mean, it's changing, but those central curriculums haven't fixed. We have to fix that fast for a start. There's a lot of direct training on this. I try and keep it a bit simpler than that and say, I spend a lot of time talking about AI to people and trying to get them to understand it. I'll do it just because I love it. But for me, it's about, I try to get people to just use AI, right? Give them enough knowledge about the real basics, so you can understand when it works and doesn't work, roughly why it's not doing that. AI isn't like a digital wizard or a genie or something. There's a very good reason that it does what it does. It's quite weird, but it does it. But if you're using AI, not in a medical sense, but just in life in general, and the examples I always give is like writing complaint letters to Amazon when they misdeliver something or whatever it is. The risk in that's pretty low. You might not want to complain anyway, so you can maybe get ChatGPT or whatever it is to help you write that letter. And in doing so, you're using it on something that will be useful. You know what you're trying to do, so you can see what it does and it doesn't do. So you start to say, well, this is how it works, this is how it doesn't work. And you say, well, this might be useful. And then you might try something else and try something else, all of it totally away from healthcare and everything like that. And you start to say, well, I now know how it behaves, and I maybe know a little bit about how it works, but I now know how it behaves, which means that when people come to you and say, and this is what we're doing in healthcare, you're like, well, now I have an idea about why it might be risky, because it stuffed up my complaint letter to Amazon and spelt it with a lot of Z's and things like that. If I did that to a patient, I'd look like a fool, kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that's the way in. And so that's everyone, clinical safety officers. So they're part of everyone here as well. I think clinical safety officers do have to spend a bit more focused time on this to develop a depth of understanding. It doesn't have to be fantastically deep, but just know basically how these models work, and why they do what they do and why they do things badly. Because once you have that, then you have the guide words that you need as you go into it. What if so using a large language model at this bit, what if it hallucinates? Like I said, what if it's wrong? That's it. What if it's biased? What if it says the wrong thing? What if it leaks personal information? What if it says something nasty? What if it does something that's not meant to do? It's not, this is we're not using a medical device here. All of a sudden it does something that makes it a medical device, then you're like, well, now all CSOs, obviously, it starts to get into the area that they kind of know. It's like, well, I know it shouldn't do that. So how do we then do that? So they can sort of lever their way in. That's what I'd maybe say. So, you and I have done talks on AI to the CSOs. We're training a lot more CSOs now, obviously. So there's general education, and then there's that kind of specialist education. Maybe you and me need to do a bit more talking about it. But for those people out there, learning a bit more and then using it, you'll be much better placed. And then sharing what you learn. I think there's a good community of CSOs that say, oh, we did this here, and this is how we solved this particularly complicated bit. And then we all kind of ladder up.
Yeah, and I think it would be really interesting. And me posing you that question actually, and you sort of responding, I've been sitting here thinking sort of a little bit of a light bulb moment that sort of, we've got the CSO Coffee and Chat with Kay Reynolds, who does an amazing job and has got a huge community of CSOs. maybe there's something in that we need to have because it's massive, Keith, isn't it, AI? And there's probably going to be, if we asked a question to that community and said, do you feel confident as a CSO in assessing AI technologies? There'd probably be a big percentage that would say, and I think they'd have the confidence now as well to say, probably no, they don't.
Yeah, well, so that's the important thing, is that people have to be, like, everyone thinks, well, other people know, and I'm a bit embarrassed that I don't, so no one says.
Yeah,
no one
absolutely.
Says,
Everyone sits behind this, don't they? Oh, crikey, I'm going to look stupid. It's like, but I always say to everyone, there's no stupid question. There's no, look, every day's a school day. I've been doing this for 18 years.
Particularly with AI. Particularly with AI.
Absolutely. We're all, and I think we're in a place because we're all still learning in relation to AI. And and that's never gonna change. So yeah, there's almost a sort of like an initiative for us to sort of ask that question. And I think at the next CSO coffee and chat, I think I'll do that one the first in June. I'll ask that question, pose that question, and try something.
Listen to us, we're workshopping it already. People are listening to this, Kay is listening to it, but I can see it. It's like you could essentially throw up a kind of simulated thing like an ambient scribe. Don't have to say, it doesn't have to be a specific example, an ambient scribe, and we understand a bit of what's intended uses, we understand who's using it, what the user flows are, roughly what the architecture is, big glowing bit saying this is where the large language model is, and then you just sit with everyone and say, let's do like a mass bit. Okay, today we're going to look at, all right, this little interaction here, this section of function, here's Mr. or Mrs. LLM. All right, hallucinations. What does hallucination mean? And then we can say, well, what does that mean here and here? And then we can say, as a group, what do we think that means? And people will say, well, I worked somewhere else and this is what we did. And then everyone's like, oh, we're now speaking the same language, we're all learning. And then, okay, and then next time it's like bias and drift or whatever, all these terms that are maybe unfamiliar now, you start to kind of get your head around.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, and just sort of like, and like you say, not bombard people with too many sort of like too much terminology, but just getting the key sort of like fact principles, like you say, drift, bias, all those sort of things, hallucinations. Have an explanation for them, but give real world examples, and we can go through that. Yeah.
Also, the other thing as well is like the critical role of the CSO is actually you're not there to just say, well, this, like what happens if this happens? Everyone dies. You're not there to sort of say like worst case scenario. You're there to sort of say, well, where's the reasonable bit? And if you don't understand the technology, how are you going to get away from the kind of terrible outcome? Because it's big and unknown. And we don't want to always go there. That doesn't help anyone. It needs to be at the right level. So it helps bring people towards that middle bit. It can be very helpful. And of course, AI moves very fast. I think even as people upskill, there'll always be new technologies. There's always a role for the specialists, the subspecialists, the independents in this area, because things move very quickly. But the fresh stuff quickly becomes the routine stuff applying everywhere. And if we want to take advantage of whatever technology it is, everyone needs to play their part in helping. So it does have to be kind of democratized in some way.
That's interesting. Because do you think then leads on to one of my questions around, should there be almost an AI safety lead type role that supports a CSO, or that you have CSOs that are AI specialists
or something,
or in relation to that, or that almost, look, I don't mind saying that we're looking at an AI course to support sort of and we're in the throes of producing that at the moment, but specifically for health organisations at the moment, that's where because there is a massive need in relation to that. That almost there are sort of like qualifications or sort of like extra bits that CSOs can do to uplift themselves in relation to that.
I think there's a short-term or even a medium-term need for something like that. But remember that talking about AI as something separate is, as far as I'm concerned, that's gone anyway. It's a bit like saying, computer or electricity. AI is everywhere. So we'll ultimately all have to get to that point. but you're right, we're in that sort of in-between period. And I know that there's an appetite, people want to know more. I mean, like here, you're talking about courses, I talk about these things all the time. People need to know. And then the technology advances. So there's always going to be a kind of gap. But between where we are now, when very few people know, and where we could be, where AI is everywhere, so everyone knows enough to do that first pass, I think there's definitely an opportunity for people, well, within the standard, and we talk about people having had the requisite experience and training, and they're not very specific on what that is, but within that, it's like, but if you're dealing with AI, you'd have to say, well, I have had requisite experience and training in AI, and this is the booting up business, isn't it? It's like when you're a junior CSO, how do you get experience when you it's hard, but more senior, more experienced CSOs with more people, more sort of structured support, cascading knowledge, and then who knows what comes next. We're talking about the health technologies. There'll be some other weird wrinkle that comes along. I spend a lot of time right now thinking about agents, AI agents, these sort of autonomous AIs that start to behave much more like humans. But we have kind of solved this for healthcare already, because we already assure the quality and safety of the humans providing the care. So it'll start to feel maybe a little bit closer to that. But I'll tell you something right now, trying to write a safety case for something agentic, where the model makes a decision about what to do next, as opposed to just doing what it's told. That's a real head scrambler. I think it's going to be possible, but right now it's complicated.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think we're gonna evolve, aren't we, in relation to sort of like our knowledge in relation to AI as it becomes more apparent. So what I'd like to do is just finish off with a sort of an area of like sticking with AI, and we spoke about this before we sort of like started recording, was the future of humanity. And and this was sort of like a friend and a sort of colleague, Dr Saif Arbed, I think you know of Saif, and the sort of who's sort of like a global influencer in that cyber information security space, and posed a question around sort of like AI deployment and development in relation to other technologies throughout evolution, have always ended up being sort of like weaponized, and you only have to look at the space race, and people think the whole sort of rocket technology and stuff like that was for that. It wasn't. It was for building missiles and firing them at people. That's how we got to the space race, and that's one of Safe's examples. But what he posed was, there's always human cost in relation to anything we do in relation to technology, especially with that weaponization. And are we in danger, or are we heading in that same direction in relation to AI? Military are putting lots of money into AI, yet they seem to be very reluctant to be the guinea pigs, and it's other people. Hence, healthcare. Are we prepared to, or are we in danger of? Are we heading in that direction? Will there be human cost in relation to what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, there will be human cost. I think there's always human cost with whatever we do, whether it's fast innovation, slow innovation. This is the history of the human race, and there are times when it accelerates and the costs rise, and then it ebbs back, and we're in that sort of higher cost area, or edges that way, because what we've got is a general purpose technology that can be used for a tremendous amount of things. Offers incredible potential benefits, but also incredible harms, and we have to sort of, we have to kind of move forward. It's so tempting to race, but there are certain things, there are certain doors that don't go both ways, and we're going to be careful to look at that. I think there's two things to sort of say about the kind of military side of it. Number one is that I have actually spoken to friends working in the military about this, particularly when it comes to things like human in the loop, when you talk about AI, about humans checking things. And of course, the military, even with just automation, are kind of masters of this, because they do a lot of that, AI or not. So how they've managed that in their extremely high stakes game. There's a lot of lessons I think we can learn there. And I've certainly understood more about what could be done in terms of controls in that situation from them. So there's positive things that could be learned back the way. The second thing is that healthcare, like, I think people can understand when life and limb is like immediately en masse through war or conflict, forces people to sort of make changes. But of course, we have been through this before very recently in healthcare with the pandemic. And what happened in the pandemic as well, this imminent threat, a lot of the things that held us back in terms of our anxieties, all of a sudden started to pale against the cost of not doing something. So we don't have to leave it entirely to those more unhappy destinations, and think that, you know, within this, there's an incredible amount of opportunity as well, but it involves us being active in this, like not waiting for someone else to do it for us, but to actually participate in it, and to, you know, swallow some of that anxiety about not knowing or not being sure and not sharing, and getting past that. Because the more people we get knowing about technologies, AI, healthcare safety, and everything like that, the more we actually start talking about these things, the less scary it becomes. It's still a little bit scary, but less scary it becomes, because we understand that we can start doing something about it. We've been very disempowered. So the future of humanity, how predictable it is, ebbs and flows over time. You know, I'm 52. I remember all the fear about nuclear war in the 80s and everything like that. We all thought it was game over then. It hasn't been yet, touch wood. Is AI any different? I don't know. People speculate on that. What I do feel is that humanity only really does things when its feet are held to the fire, and we're getting our feet kind of closer held. But we can get through it. And within healthcare, we are kind of having feet held to the fire because of the demand and the costs and everything like that. So, you know, it's uncomfortable, but I've seen good things happen before. So I'm going to be positive and say good things can happen again, if we all just commit to it and don't hide.
Keith, that's absolutely fantastic, and I think we've come to a natural close there.
Positive close, a positive close.
A positive close, an absolute positive close. It's all good things about artificial intelligence, and I'm really excited about it. Before you go, I do for one last thing for all of my guests is, if there's, just put you on the spot, there's just one takeaway from our conversations for the audience, what would that be?
My one takeaway, I think I've got a few, but I'm trying to boil it down to the important one. Is it unreasonable to think that the technology we use to provide care shouldn't be safe, or should be safe? Is it unreasonable is it reasonable to ignore it? Is it unreasonable to address it? No. Whatever it is, we want it to be safe enough to do what it does. That you think it is difficult, maybe stems from not understanding what it would take to do this. It doesn't need to be as hard as you think it might be. But even if it was hard, it's still right that we make sure that what we use is safe. That's all safety is. And technology, or AI, it's no different to anything else. So spend a moment with that and think about that. And then wherever you are with it just now, there's always a step you can make closer to making things safer. And yeah, you'll sleep better for it.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on episode 23. Great discussion. And I'm sure we'll have you back on, and we'll be doing some great stuff in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you ever so much.
Working together to raise the bar, hey?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thanks again, Keith.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
All right.